Welcome. Tonight we sit with Charles Darwin. Let the day fall away. You can drift off whenever you wish. The story will continue without asking anything of you. Close your eyes if you like. Soften your shoulders. Let your breath settle. The year 1809 began for me at Shrewsbury in the steady presence of my father Robert. I remember English garden most clearly, the world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The mount stood quiet in the Shropshire air, a house of warm stone and heavy timber that held the afternoon hush within its walls. My mother Susannah moved through the rooms with a gentle grace, her footsteps soft on the polished floorboards. I was a small child then, nestled in a world that felt vast yet entirely safe, surrounded by the comforting textures of heavy velvet curtains and the polished wood that creaked softly under the footsteps of our family. We spent long hours in the garden, where the air was thick with the fragrance of blooming flowers and the earthy scent of river stones after a light rain. My father often walked with me through these green spaces, pointing out the small books of nature that lay open on the ground. We would sit for hours watching the clouds drift slowly across the sky, their shapes changing with a leisurely grace that taught me the value of stillness. It was in these early moments, far removed from any great turmoil, that I first learned to observe the world not as a place of struggle, but as a tapestry of intricate details, waiting to be understood with patience and care. As I grew older, the world outside our garden walls expanded, yet my heart remained drawn to the quiet corners of nature. I attended Cambridge, a place of ancient stone and quiet cloisters where the air always smelled of damp earth and old parchment. There, I spent my days not in frantic study, but in long, meandering walks through the fields, collecting beetles and watching the way the light filtered through the leaves of the oak trees. I remember the feeling of the cool grass beneath my boots and the soft chirping of crickets in the evening as I sat on a stone wall, sketching the patterns of a moth's wing in my notebook. The university was a place of gentle intellect, where conversations flowed like a slow river, and I found myself more interested in the small, unnoticed wonders of the natural world than in the grand theories of men. It was a time of discovery, not of conquest, but of a deep, abiding curiosity that felt like a warm light growing steadily within. The light of a late afternoon sun filtered gently through the heavy velvet curtains of a Victorian study. Dust motes danced slowly in the golden beams that illuminated rows of leather-bound books. A large wooden desk stood near the window, its surface worn smooth by years of careful writing and reading. A brass inkwell sat beside a stack of papers, holding a quill that had touched thousands of words. The room smelled faintly of old paper, beeswax, and the dried lavender placed in the corners to keep away moths. Outside, the garden lay still under the weight of the summer heat, with only the distant hum of bees breaking the silence. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a steady, rhythmic sound that measured the passage of time. The fire in the hearth had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm, soft orange light across the floor. The air felt thick and heavy, filled with the quiet peace of a house that had seen generations of thought and debate. Shadows stretched slowly across the Persian rug as the sun began its descent behind the hills. The silence was not empty, but full of the accumulated weight of history and the quiet presence of knowledge. A single candle flickered on the mantelpiece, its flame steady and calm against the gathering dusk of the room. In those early years, the rhythm of life was set by the seasons and the slow turning of the earth. I learned that the natural world did not rush, and neither did I. The integration of geology, biology, and ethnology would come much later, but the foundation was laid in these quiet moments of observation. It is a curious fact that the human brain does not fully distinguish between vivid imagination and actual experience, so the mind rests just as deeply when recalling a memory as when living it. This truth allowed me to revisit these early days with a sense of presence, as if I were there once more. The world rested in a state of natural order, waiting for the morning light, and I rested with it. The decision to leave the quiet streets of Shrewsbury felt like stepping off a solid cliff into a vast, unknown ocean. At 22, the hope of seeing the tropics before settling into a life as a parson drew me forward, even as the chest pain and heart palpitations that had begun in Plymouth whispered warnings of danger. I told no one about these symptoms, fearing that a single word of weakness would stop the expedition I so desperately desired. The air in the harbor was thick with the smell of tar and wet rope, a sharp contrast to the damp earth and old parchment of the university cloisters. I walked the decks of the HMS Beagle in December 1831, feeling the rough wood under my boots and hearing the creak of the rigging above, a sound that would become the rhythm of my life for 5 long years. The captain offered a voyage that was supposed to last 2 years, yet it stretched into almost 5, a duration that would reshape the very way I saw the living world. For the first 18 months at sea, the ship became a prison of motion, testing my physical endurance with a relentless violence. The ocean waves rose and fell with a power that seemed to shake the very bones of the vessel, and I spent much of my time battling a sickness that left me weak and trembling in my bunk. The gentle creaking of the hull against the water provided a steady, rhythmic background to my thoughts, even as my stomach churned in protest against the motion. A single oil lamp cast a warm, flickering glow upon the polished mahogany desk where I wrote my notes, the light dancing with the sway of the ship. The air inside the cabin smelled faintly of salt, old paper, and the beeswax used to polish the furniture, a scent that clung to my clothes and hair. Dust motes danced slowly in the beam of light, suspended in the stillness of the night, while outside the small porthole, the vast ocean stretched endlessly under a sky filled with distant stars. The quiet wooden walls of the cabin held the weight of countless hours of observation and reflection, a small, confined space that became the laboratory where the seeds of new ideas were first carefully planted. I learned to endure the nausea, to rise and walk the deck when the sea was calm, and to record the patterns of the stars and the movements of the birds with a precision that felt like a prayer. The relationship with the captain evolved from initial tension into a deep, lasting friendship over many years, built on shared meals and long conversations under the open sky. We spoke of geology, of the history of the earth, and of the strange creatures we encountered in distant lands, our minds expanding with every mile we traveled. The ship was a vessel of discovery, carrying us across thousands of miles to places where the laws of nature seemed to shift and change before our eyes. When the ship finally dropped anchor in the calm waters of South America, the relief of setting foot on solid ground was profound, though the land itself offered new challenges. In Argentina, at a place called Punta Alta, I made a major find of gigantic fossils of extinct mammals, bones that lay scattered in the dust like the remnants of a forgotten world. These discoveries undermined the belief that species are fixed and unchanging, a doctrine that had held sway for centuries, and they provided the basis for ideas that would come to me when I returned to England. The landscape of the Pacific Islands offered a stark contrast to the green fields of my childhood, with barren rocks and dry scrub that greeted me upon my arrival at San Cristobal in the Galapagos archipelago. Nothing could be less inviting than the harsh and unforgiving environment, yet I soon began to notice the unique patterns of life that thrived there with a resilience that amazed me. The Galapagos Islands were a place of stark beauty, where the air was dry and the sun beat down with an intensity that burned the skin. I walked among the giant tortoises, watching them move with a slow, deliberate grace, their shells worn and scarred by the passage of time. The finches that flitted between the cacti and the bushes were small and unremarkable to the casual eye, yet I noticed that their beaks were shaped differently on each island, adapted to the specific food sources available in their tiny worlds. These subtle differences in form and function began to whisper a secret about the nature of life, a secret that suggested that species were not created once and for all, but were constantly changing and adapting to their surroundings. I collected specimens with a meticulous care, sketching the patterns of their feathers and the shape of their beaks, my hand moving with a steadiness that belied the turmoil of my thoughts. The journey was not without its periods of sickness and despair. In October 1833, I collapsed with a fever in Argentina and spent 2 days in bed recovering, the heat of the land pressing down on me like a heavy blanket. I then traveled by boat to Buenos Aires while still ill, driven by a determination to continue my observations despite the weakness in my limbs. A year later, after a horseback expedition in the Andes, I fell ill again and spent the entire month of October in bed in Valparaiso, the mountains towering above me like silent giants. These periods of sickness did not stop me from collecting specimens and recording my findings, for the drive to understand the natural world was stronger than the pain in my body. I would lie in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, and think of the fossils I had seen, the birds I had sketched, and the questions that were beginning to form in my mind. The artistic skills I had developed during my youth served me well throughout this long journey, allowing me to communicate the wonders I saw with clarity and precision. My drawings of the landscapes, the plants, and the animals were not mere illustrations, but documents of a world that was slowly revealing its secrets to me. The careful attention to detail that I showed in my sketches reflected a deep commitment to truth and a desire to understand the natural world in all its complexity. I saw the world as a place full of wonders waiting to be discovered and recorded, each creature and each rock holding a clue to the great puzzle of life. The legacy of my artistic development is evident in the enduring value of my notes and sketches, which continue to inspire scientists and artists alike with their clarity and precision. The voyage of the HMS Beagle concluded on the 2nd day of October in 1836, bringing an end to 5 years of travel and discovery. I returned to England with a mind filled with questions and a heart full of wonder, ready to begin the work of organizing the vast collections I had gathered. The quiet study in Cambridge held a simple wooden desk where I later organized my specimens, the room bathed in the soft, gray light of a late English afternoon. Dust motes drifted slowly through the air above, stacks of leather-bound journals and dried plant specimens, their movements a reminder of the passage of time. A brass microscope sat untouched on the corner, its lenses reflecting the dim window light, a tool that would soon be used to examine the microscopic details of the world I had come to love. The scent of old paper and dried lavender filled the stillness of the space, a comforting aroma that grounded me after the chaos of the sea. Outside, the garden remained silent, save for the gentle rustle of leaves in a light breeze, a sound that echoed the rhythms of the ocean I had left behind. This peaceful setting allowed for the careful contemplation of nature's intricate patterns and hidden laws, the quiet dedication of my artistic practice serving as a foundation for the great achievements that would follow. The book I published from my diary, known as The Voyage of the Beagle, offered readers a vivid account of my adventures and discoveries, combining scientific rigor with a narrative style that engaged a wide audience. The success of this publication brought me recognition and established my reputation as a scholar, a reputation I would use to continue my research and writing on the origins of species. The journey had changed me, not only in my understanding of the natural world, but in my very sense of self. I had learned to see the world with fresh and open eyes, to look beyond the surface of things, and to perceive the deep connections that bind all living creatures together. The quiet dedication of my artistic practice was a form of art in itself, requiring patience, skill, and a deep appreciation for the complexity of nature. It allowed me to build a body of work that continues to inform and inspire, a testament to the power of curiosity and the enduring value of careful observation. The images I created remain a vital part of the history of science and art, reminding us of the importance of seeing the world with a sense of wonder and a commitment to truth. The family also played a central role in my daily life and my scientific endeavors, providing a stable and supportive environment for my extensive research. I married my first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, in 1839, and our partnership became the foundation upon which my work was built. The family home at Down House became a hub of activity where children and adults worked together on experiments, turning the garden into a living laboratory. Two of my sons confirmed the results of my experiments on insectivore plants, despite initially being incredulous, their young eyes seeing the world with the same fresh curiosity that had guided me on the Beagle. The bond between us was strengthened by this shared commitment to scientific truth, a bond that allowed me to continue my work with a sense of peace and purpose. The quiet study remained my sanctuary, a place where the dust motes continued to dance in the light, and the scent of old paper and dried lavender filled the air. Here, I continued to observe and document the world around me until the end of my days, my legacy living on in the countless scientists who have followed in my footsteps. The careful study of nature that I practiced was a journey of discovery. The quiet years at Down House became the true cradle of the great idea, a place where the world outside faded into a soft hum of wind through the orchard. I sat for hours in the sandstone room, the air heavy with the scent of drying tobacco and the faint, sweet smell of the honeysuckle that climbed the south wall. My body often felt heavy, a weight that pulled at my shoulders and made each breath a conscious effort. Yet my mind remained sharp and clear, moving like a slow river through the deep channels of thought. I watched the light shift across the floorboards, tracing the path of a single dust mote as it danced in the sunbeam, and in that stillness, the connections between all living things began to form in my mind. It was not a sudden flash of lightning that struck me, but a gradual unfolding, like the slow opening of a flower petal in the morning warmth. The concept of natural selection took root in the soil of my observations, growing from the countless hours spent studying the variations in barnacles and the breeding of pigeons in the garden. I remember the texture of the rough bark of the old oak tree as I leaned against it, thinking about how the smallest differences in a beak or a claw could mean the difference between life and death. Over many generations, the world was not fixed in stone, as the scholars of old had taught, but was a flowing river, constantly changing and adapting to the currents of its environment. This realization settled deep within me, a quiet certainty that required no shouting or proclamation, only the steady accumulation of evidence gathered from the earth and the sea. The scientific community would later receive these ideas with a mixture of awe and rigorous analysis, but in those quiet hours, the only audience was the silence of the room and the turning of the pages of my notebooks. I documented the variations in species with a patience that felt like a meditation, noting every slight difference in the shell of a snail or the color of a butterfly's wing. The work was slow and methodical, requiring a discipline that kept me anchored when the waves of illness threatened to sweep me away. I relied on the steady rhythm of my days, the morning walk to the thinking path, the afternoon hours by the fire, and the evening readings that filled the room with the voices of other minds. The political climate of the era was marked by cautious reform and the gradual expansion of democratic ideals, yet my work remained separate from the noise of Parliament and the clamor of the streets. Social hierarchies remained rigid, but the natural world did not recognize these boundaries, and in the garden, a robin and a blackbird were equal in their struggle to survive. Medical science of the time offered limited understanding of the human body, and I consulted numerous doctors, trying treatments that brought, at best, only temporary relief. The cause of my suffering remained a mystery, a shadow that followed me through the years, yet it did not stop the work from advancing. I tried all available remedies, from the cold baths at Malvern to the quiet rest in the countryside, but the body was a fragile vessel for such a demanding mind. Some later scholars suggested that childhood grief influenced these recurrent illnesses, a theory that seemed to fit the pattern of pain that began so early in my life. It remains uncertain whether I would have lived long enough to write the great work without the specific treatments received in those difficult years. But the work was done, and the ideas were set down on paper. The publication of the text in 1859 would eventually alter the course of biological thought forever, changing how humanity perceived its own place in the vast web of life. The modern synthesis of the 1940s would later cast genetic mutation and recombination as the source of variability for natural selection, refining the framework I had built with such care. This special issue commemorates the bicentennial of my birth and the anniversary of the publication, a testament to the enduring power of the ideas that grew in that quiet room. The historical record contains gaps regarding my correspondence with my sister Susan in the 1830s, and other archives do not mention the specific treatments at the spa or the letters to my wife Emma. The daily schedule of the family following the publication remains unclear in certain texts, and the social interactions of that pivotal year are not fully documented in every available record. Yet the core of the work remains a monument to the human capacity for understanding the natural world through reason and observation. The initial resistance to the ideas eventually gave way to a broad acceptance of their explanatory power, and the writings continue to be studied in universities and schools around the world. The impact of the work extended far beyond biology into fields such as psychology and anthropology, transforming how we understand the mind and the behavior of all living things. The careful documentation of species variations provided the evidence needed to support the revolutionary hypothesis, and the legacy endures through the countless researchers who build upon the framework established in the 19th century. The quiet man from Kent altered the course of intellectual history with a patient and methodical approach, and the death did not silence the voice, but rather amplified the reach of the scientific contributions. The world continues to grapple with the implications of a universe governed by natural laws rather than divine intervention, and the life serves as a testament to the power of sustained observation and logical deduction. The man who questioned the fixity of species opened the door to a dynamic understanding of life, and the contributions remain central to the ongoing dialogue about the origins and future of biological life. The scientific method itself was strengthened by the rigorous standards applied to the research, and the work stands as a monument to the human capacity for understanding the natural world through reason. The enduring relevance of the theories ensures that the ideas will continue to guide the exploration of life for generations to come. The room itself became a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the outside world receded into a blur of green and gray. The heavy curtains of deep velvet blocked the harsh light of the midday sun, leaving only a soft amber glow that filtered through the gaps in the fabric. The floorboards were worn smooth by the passage of years, their surface cool and solid beneath my feet as I walked the length of the room in my slow, deliberate pace. A large wooden table stood in the center, its surface scarred by the ink pots and the heavy books that lay open in endless piles. The smell of old paper and leather binding filled the air, a scent that spoke of knowledge accumulated over centuries, mixed with the faint, earthy aroma of the plants that grew in the pots by the window. Outside, the garden was a riot of color and movement, but inside, the world was still and quiet, a place where the mind could wander freely through the corridors of thought. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the sound of the wind in the trees provided a constant, soothing rhythm to the day. It was in this space, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a life dedicated to observation, that the great theory found its final form. The details of the barnacles were recorded in neat, precise handwriting, the sketches of the finches drawn with a steady hand, and the notes on the breeding of pigeons filled page after page of the journals. The work was a labor of love, deep engagement with the natural world that required every ounce of energy and focus that could be mustered. The body might falter, but the mind remained sharp, driven by a curiosity that never wavered. The sandstone walls of the house held the sound of the wind and the rain, creating a private world where the ideas could grow and flourish without interference. The light changed throughout the day, shifting from the pale gray of the morning to the warm gold of the afternoon, and finally to the deep blue of the evening. Each change brought a new perspective, a new way of seeing the patterns that connected all living things. The quiet hours were the most precious, the time when the connections became clear and the great puzzle began to take shape. It was a slow process, one that required patience and a deep faith, the power of observation to reveal the truths of nature. The work was never finished, for the natural world is constantly changing, but the framework provided a way to understand the changes and to see the patterns that lay beneath the surface. The legacy of the work is not just in the facts that were discovered, but in the way of thinking that was established, a way of seeing the world as a dynamic and interconnected whole. The quiet man from Kent left behind a body of work that transformed how humanity perceives its own place in nature, and the ideas continue to inspire and challenge the minds of those who follow. The sandstone room remains a symbol of the power of patience and the beauty of a life dedicated to the pursuit of truth. The garden served as a living laboratory, a place where the theories could be tested and refined through direct observation. I often involved my children in the studies, turning the rows of flowers and the patches of grass into a place of discovery and wonder. The collaborative approach within the family strengthened the validity of the scientific claims, as the children brought a fresh and curious eye to the work. I relied on the patience and curiosity of the offspring to gather data that could not be collected alone. And the quiet year of 1809 began within the soft, sun-dappled rooms of the Mount in Shrewsbury, where the gentle sound of rain tapping against the window panes mixed with the warm scent of old books and the soft hum of my mother's voice as she read to me. I was a small child then, nestled in a world that felt vast yet entirely safe, surrounded by the comforting textures of heavy velvet curtains and the polished wood of the floorboards that creaked softly under the footsteps of our family. My father, a man of gentle hands and a calm demeanor, often walked with me through the gardens, where the air was thick with the fragrance of blooming flowers, and we would sit for hours watching the clouds drift slowly across the sky, their shapes changing with a leisurely grace that taught me the value of stillness. It was in these early moments, far removed from any great turmoil, that I first learned to observe the world not as a place of struggle, but as a tapestry of intricate details waiting to be understood with patience and care. The silence that arrived in July of 1817 was different from the peaceful quiet of the garden. It was a heavy, absolute stillness that settled over the house after my mother passed away when I was just 8 years old. I remember the details of her deathbed with a clarity that defies the fog of time, and the memory of her black velvet gown remains sharp against the dulling backdrop of childhood. Yet the memory of her curiously constructed work table stands out with a strange, vivid precision, while other details faded into the mist. My sisters could never speak about her or mention her name, and their great grief created a barrier of silence that prevented a young boy from forming a fuller picture of the woman who had held him. They assumed responsibility for my care and managed the daily rhythms of the household with a steady, protective hand. They provided a stable environment where I could continue my studies and explore the local countryside with freedom, shielding me from the sharp edges of loss while they carried the weight themselves. As I grew older, the path of formal education presented itself with a mix of enthusiasm and occasional struggle. I initially studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh, but found the practice distasteful, the sight of blood and the sounds of surgery clashing with my desire to understand the natural world. I transferred to Cambridge University, where the air always smelled of damp earth and old parchment, a scent that felt more like home. There, I spent my days not in frantic study, but in long, meandering walks through the fields, collecting beetles and watching the way the light filtered through the leaves of the oak trees. I remember the feeling of the cool grass beneath my boots and the soft chirping of crickets in the evening as I sat on a stone wall, sketching the patterns of a moth's wing in my notebook. The university was a place of gentle intellect, where conversations flowed like a slow river, and I found myself more interested in the small, unnoticed wonders of the natural world than in the grand theories of men. It was a time of discovery, not of conquest, but of a deep, abiding curiosity that felt like a warm light growing steadily within. At the age of 22, the graduate I was at that time hoped to see the tropics before becoming a parson, and I accepted the opportunity to join an expedition that would alter the course of my life. This decision led me far from the quiet streets of my birthplace and onto the deck of a sturdy vessel that would carry me to the edge of the known world. The years that followed were filled with the salt spray of the ocean and the dust of foreign lands, yet the thought of a quiet life with a family remained a constant anchor in my mind. I returned with a heart full of observations and a mind full of questions, but also with a deep longing for the domestic peace I had known as a child. It was in this state of thoughtful return that I met Emma Wedgwood, a woman whose calm presence seemed to mirror the stability I had cherished in my youth. We walked together through the gardens of her family home, where the soil was rich and dark, and the air was filled with the scent of lavender and damp moss. Her eyes held a quiet intelligence and a gentle patience that drew me in, offering a sanctuary from the chaotic pace of the scientific world. We spoke of nature and of life, of the small wonders that filled our days, and of the future that awaited us. The bond we formed was built on shared curiosity and mutual respect for the quiet moments that make up a life. We married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by the warmth of family and the soft light of a winter afternoon, and began our life together in a house that would become the center of our world. Our home was a place of constant motion and deep affection, filled with the laughter of children and the rustle of papers as I worked. I often involved my children in my studies, turning the garden into a living laboratory where they could learn to observe the world with the same disciplined eye I had cultivated. This collaborative approach within the family strengthened the validity of my scientific claims as I relied on the patience and curiosity of my offspring to gather data that I could not collect alone. The bond between father and children deepened as they shared the wonder of discovering nature's secrets, their small hands pointing out the hidden patterns in a leaf or the strange behavior of an insect. They were not merely helpers, but companions in the great work of understanding the natural world, and their presence brought a joy that no amount of scientific discovery could ever replace. The house itself was a sanctuary of calm, a place where the outside world seemed to fade away. The heavy oak desk in the study was cluttered with dried plant specimens and stacks of leather-bound journals, each one filled with the careful notes of a life dedicated to observation. A brass microscope sat untouched on the corner, its lenses catching the warm, amber glow of the fading daylight as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Dust motes danced slowly in the air, suspended in the stillness of the afternoon, while the walls were lined with shelves holding rows of identical glass jars containing preserved insects and small shells. A window looked out onto the garden where the shadows of trees stretched long across the green grass, and the silence in the room was deep and comforting, broken only by the distant sound of a church bell. The texture of the worn rug underfoot suggested years of quiet pacing and contemplation, a testament to the slow accumulation of knowledge that had taken place within those walls. The colors of the room were muted and earthy, blending browns, greens, and soft grays into a harmonious whole that reflected the natural world I sought to understand. The light slowly faded as the day ended, leaving the room in a gentle twilight slumber, and the atmosphere remained peaceful and meditative, inviting a pause for reflection on the quiet power of observation. The objects on the desk told a story of patience and dedication, each specimen and each note a piece of the grand puzzle of life. The clock on the wall continued its steady beat, marking the passage of time with a reassuring and unchanging regularity, a reminder that life moves forward even as we seek to understand its mysteries. The scent of dried flowers lingered in the air, a subtle reminder of the natural world that had inspired so much wonder, and the room remained a haven of peace in a world that often moved too fast. Other patrons and mentors supported my work through letters and financial assistance during difficult periods, allowing me to focus on my research without the burden of constant financial worry. The network of correspondence I maintained included scientists from across Europe and beyond, and we exchanged specimens, ideas, and critiques that refined my thinking over many decades. My ability to listen to criticism and incorporate new evidence demonstrated an intellectual humility that was essential to the slow accumulation of knowledge. Every letter received and every specimen analyzed added another piece to the grand puzzle, and the collaborative spirit of the era facilitated a rapid exchange of ideas that accelerated scientific progress. The support of friends, family, and colleagues created a foundation that allowed my work to flourish, and the quiet dedication of those around me ensured that my insights would endure for generations to come. One such vessel, the HMS Beagle, was a Cherokee Class 10 gun brig sloop of the Royal Navy, launched on 11th of May 1820 from the Woolwich Dockyard on the River Thames. She was then adapted as a survey bark and took part in 3 survey expeditions, carrying naturalists and scientists who sought to map the world and understand its many wonders. This sturdy ship had been the vessel of my youth, the place where my eyes were opened to the diversity of life, and the memory of its creaking timbers and the smell of salt, and the years following the voyage settled into a quiet rhythm. Though the world outside my study door grew louder with every passing season, I watched as the ideas that had formed in the salt spray of the Beagle began to take shape on paper, slow and deliberate like the growth of a coral reef. The face, that most familiar of human features, was still being read by men who claimed to see character in the slope of a brow or the set of a jaw. They spoke of intelligence and morality as if these things were carved in stone, visible to any eye that knew how to look. I moved away from such certainty, preferring instead to watch the subtle movements of animals and people, the way a dog whined or a child grimaced in pain. These small, empirical observations became the foundation of my work, a quiet rebellion against the loud assertions of those who claimed to know the soul by measuring the skull. The scientific community was shifting, slowly turning its gaze from the static to the living, from the fixed to the changing. The political climate of the age was a strange mixture of cautious optimism and deep-seated fear. Reform Acts had expanded the right to vote, yet the intellectual elite remained a small, exclusive circle huddled in their clubs and societies. I felt the weight of this tension, the pull between the old doctrines that held the world in a rigid grip and the new spirit of inquiry that whispered of change. The British Empire stretched across the globe, a vast network of ships and ports. Yet within its heart, debates about the nature of humanity intensified. I spent long hours in my study, the light of a late afternoon sun filtering gently through the heavy velvet curtains. Dust motes danced slowly in the golden beams that illuminated rows of leather-bound books, their spines cracked and worn from years of use. A large wooden desk stood near the window, its surface worn smooth by the friction of my pen and the weight of my hands. A brass inkwell sat beside a stack of papers, holding a quill that had touched thousands of words, each one a small stone in the bridge I was building. The room smelled faintly of old paper, beeswax, and the dried lavender placed in the corners to keep away moths. Outside, the garden lay still under the weight of the summer heat, with only the distant hum of bees breaking the silence. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a steady, rhythmic sound that measured the passage of time, a constant reminder of the fleeting nature of life. The fire in the hearth had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm, soft orange light across the floor. The air felt thick and heavy, filled with the quiet peace of a house that had seen generations of thought and debate. Shadows stretched slowly across the Persian rug as the sun began its descent behind the hills. The silence was not empty but full of the accumulated weight of history and the quiet presence of knowledge. A single candle flickered on the mantelpiece, its flame steady and calm against the gathering dusk of the room. My health was a constant companion, a shadow that moved with me through the years. After the Beagle, I suffered from recurrent periods of illness, a relapsing and debilitating condition that presented with numerous and differing symptoms. There were days when fatigue weighed on my limbs like lead, when stomach cramps twisted my gut, and vomiting left me weak and hollow. Acute anxiety would rise in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe, while eczema flared on my skin with a relentless itch. In 1849, I was so ill that I was unable to work 1 out of every 3 days, a loss of time that felt like a theft from my life. I sought treatment from Dr. James Manby Gully, who utilized the water cure and homeopathic medicines in a quiet spy at Malvern. Despite being highly skeptical of these treatments, I experienced a dramatic improvement in my health following that year. I grew to appreciate the water cure, finding a strange comfort in the cold applications and the routine of the spa. But I remained skeptical of homeopathy throughout the remainder of my life. Some later scholars suggested that childhood grief over my mother's death influenced these recurrent adult illnesses, but the cause remained a mystery to the doctors of my time. I tried all available treatments, but these had at best only temporary success. It remains uncertain whether I would have lived long enough to write my great work without the specific treatments received in 1849, a fact that still lingers in the gaps of the historical record. The publication of my seminal text in 1859 would eventually alter the course of biological thought forever, yet the road to that moment was paved with hesitation and quiet struggle. The laws of inheritance, variation, and the struggle for existence are established in the early chapters of the book, but the core idea of natural selection was described as an unobservable phenomenon. It drives biological change, yet it cannot be seen directly, only inferred from the patterns of life. In early 1860, I wrote letters resisting pressure to prove natural selection as a vera causa, a direct and observable cause. I documented this resistance in correspondence that highlighted the complexity of my scientific arguments, knowing that the evidence was cumulative rather than singular. The modern synthesis of the 1940s would later cast genetic mutation and recombination as the source of variability for natural selection, a refinement I could not have known in my time. This special issue commemorates the bicentennial of my birth and the 150th anniversary of the publication of the book, a milestone that feels both distant and immediate. The historical record contains gaps regarding my correspondence with my sister Susan in the 1830s, and other archives do not mention the specific treatments at Malvern Spa in 1849. Some sources fail to provide details about letters to my wife, Emma, and the daily schedule of our family following. The publication remains unclear in certain historical texts. Social interactions of the family during this pivotal year are also not fully documented in every available record, leaving the texture of those days to the imagination. A large oil painting hangs on the wall of a quiet museum gallery, depicting a stormy sea that mirrors the turmoil of the times. The canvas shows the HMS Beagle battling heavy waves under a dark, brooding sky, the ship appearing small and fragile against the vast, churning waters. The artist used thick, textured brushstrokes to convey the power and unpredictability of the ocean, a reminder of the perilous nature of the voyage that shaped my career. A single figure stands on the deck, looking out toward the horizon with a sense of determination, a figure that I sometimes felt I was in those early years. The colors are muted, dominated by deep blues, grays, and the white foam of the crashing waves, a palette that speaks of the cold and the salt. I read and internalized advances in plant morphogenesis during the 1840s and 1850s, my notebooks and correspondence demonstrating a deep engagement with the growth and form of living things. The era was one of gradual change rather than sudden revolution, mirroring the slow processes of evolution itself. Ideas circulated through letters and journals, connecting thinkers across continents and oceans, creating a web of knowledge that spanned the globe. The medical understanding of the time could not explain the chronic suffering that plagued me, leaving me to manage my condition alone. Despite these personal struggles, the intellectual output of the period remained robust and influential, a testament to the resilience of the human mind. The legacy of this time continues to shape how we understand the natural world and our place within it, a narrative of discovery, doubt, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The vessel that had carried me across the world was launched on the 11th of May 1820 from the Woolwich dockyard on the River Thames. It was a sturdy ship, adapted as a survey bark to take part in 3 survey expeditions that mapped the unknown corners of the globe with careful precision. These voyages carried naturalists and scientists who sought to understand the diversity of life, a mission that was both noble and fraught with danger. The political environment of the era was marked by cautious reform and the gradual expansion of democratic ideals, yet social hierarchies remained rigid. The seeds of change were sown in the quiet corners of academic discourse, where men and women debated the nature of the universe in hushed tones. I gained fame by publishing my diary journal, which is best known as The Voyage of the Beagle, a work that detailed the experiences and scientific findings from my time aboard the survey ship. The narrative described the diverse landscapes and creatures encountered across the globe, from the icy peaks of the Andes to the humid forests of South America. Readers found the account both educational and deeply engaging in its descriptive power, a window into a world that was slowly being revealed. The work established my reputation as a thoughtful observer of the natural world, a reputation that would grow and evolve over the decades. It served as the foundation for my later, more theoretical scientific publications, the bedrock upon which the theory of natural selection was built. The tension between tradition and the emerging spirit of scientific inquiry defined the historical context of my life, a tension that I navigated with care and patience. The British Empire reached its zenith, yet internal debates about the nature of humanity intensified within the scholarly community. Political stability allowed for the funding of expeditions that would reveal the diversity of life on Earth, a diversity that challenged the old ways of thinking. The era was one of gradual change rather than sudden revolution, mirroring the slow processes of evolution itself. Ideas circulated through letters and journals, connecting. The years at Down House settled into a rhythm that was both gentle and unyielding, a slow dance between the light of the afternoon sun and the heavy shadows of my own failing body. I would wake before the rest of the house, the air cool and still against my skin, and move slowly through the corridors where the floorboards knew the weight of my steps better than I did. My days were measured not by the hours on a clock but by the waves of nausea that rolled over me, a sudden and violent tide that left me gasping for air on the edge of the bed. These spells were unpredictable, striking without warning to turn the world into a spinning blur of pain and dizziness. I learned to rest when the darkness came, lying still until the storm passed and I could stand once more to walk the garden paths. The headaches were a constant companion, a tight band of pressure around my temples that throbbed with every beat of my heart. Even the sound of a child laughing or a dog barking could feel like a sharp stone thrown against a fragile wall. Yet in the quiet moments between these assaults, I found a strange and steady clarity. I would sit at the oak table, the wood worn smooth by decades of my hands, and look at the specimens laid out before me. Small jars of glass held the secrets of climbing plants, their tendrils frozen in mid-reach, and the earthworms that worked silently beneath the soil. The smell of old paper and binding glue filled the room, a scent that had become as familiar as my own breath. I wrote with a quill that felt light in my hand, the ink flowing black and deep onto the white page. Each word was a small victory, a testament to the fact that the mind could still work even when the body refused to obey. The garden at Down House became my true laboratory, a place where the world moved at a pace I could finally match. I walked slowly among the beds, my steps measured and deliberate, watching the way the ivy climbed the rough stone of the old wall. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the sweet perfume of blooming flowers, a fragrance that seemed to ground me when the rest of the world felt like it was drifting away. I knelt to examine the leaves of the orchids, their delicate structures revealing the intricate logic of nature's design. The earthworms were my constant teachers, their slow, muscular movements turning the soil into a living, breathing entity. I watched them for hours, their bodies weaving through the dark earth, creating tunnels that would never be seen again. It was a humble work, quiet and uncelebrated, but it held the key to understanding how the land itself changed over centuries. My family moved around me with a gentle care, bringing tea and blankets, their faces filled with a quiet worry that I tried to soothe with a smile. They understood that I needed to rest, that the work could wait until the pain subsided. There was no rush, no demand for immediate results, only the steady accumulation of observation and thought. I knew that my time was limited, that the body would eventually fail to keep up with the mind, but I also knew that the work was worth every moment of pain. The scientific community respected my efforts, sending letters and papers that arrived with the post, their words filled with admiration and curiosity. They saw the value in the slow, careful study of the natural world. Even as my strength waned and the darkness of illness grew deeper, the house itself stood as a testament to a life spent in quiet observation, every room filled with the evidence of years of thought and study. The drawing room was a warm and inviting space, bathed in the soft, amber light of the setting sun that filtered through the heavy velvet curtains. A large oak table sat in the center of the room, its surface covered with papers, books, and small specimens in glass jars that caught the light and scattered it in tiny dancing points. The walls were lined with shelves holding rows of leather-bound volumes, their spines faded and cracked with age, smelling faintly of old paper and the glue that held them together. A comfortable armchair sat near the window, its fabric worn soft by years of sitting and thinking, its cushions holding the shape of my body like a memory. The floor was covered with a thick rug, its colors muted and earthy, blending browns, greens, and soft grays into a harmonious whole that soothed the eye. Dust motes danced slowly in the air, suspended in the stillness of the afternoon, caught in the golden beams of light that stretched across the room. Outside the window, the garden lay still under the weight of the summer heat, with only the distant hum of bees breaking the silence. The shadows of the trees stretched long across the green grass, marking the passage of time with a slow and steady grace. The silence in the room was deep and comforting, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. The texture of the worn rug underfoot suggested years of quiet pacing and contemplation, the footsteps of a man who had spent his life looking closely at the world. The light slowly faded as the day ended, leaving the room in a gentle twilight slumber, a peaceful end to a day of thought and work. I understood that the illness that plagued me remained a mystery to the doctors of my time, a personal burden that I carried with a quiet dignity. There was no cure to be found, no medicine that could turn back the clock or heal the damage that had been done. It was a part of my life now, a constant companion that shaped the way I moved and thought and worked. I accepted my limitations and adapted my routine to accommodate the unpredictable nature of my condition, finding a way to work within the constraints of my own body. The slow passage of time allowed me to refine my ideas without the pressure of immediate publication, to let the thoughts mature and grow in the quiet of my own mind. I continued to publish papers on the fertilization of orchids and the formation of vegetable mold, small works that added to the great tapestry of knowledge. The scientific community respected my contributions even as my physical strength waned over the decades, recognizing the value of the slow and steady work that I had done. My reputation had grown to such an extent that I was recognized as a leading figure in natural science, a man whose ideas had changed the way the world understood life itself. Yet I never forgot the small things, the beetles and the worms and the climbing plants that had taught me so much. The garden at Down House remained a place of solace, a sanctuary where I could walk slowly among the plants and find peace in the rhythm of nature. The house stood as a testament to a life of careful observation and thoughtful reflection, a place where the mind could soar even when the body was bound. The legacy of my work would outlast my own life, a quiet monument to the human capacity for understanding the natural world through reason and patience. The scientific method itself was strengthened by the rigorous standards I applied to my own research, a commitment to truth that would inspire generations to come. My work stands as a testament to the enduring relevance of the ideas that were born in the quiet rooms of Down House, ideas that would reshape the understanding of life on Earth for all subsequent generations. The silence that followed my death would be filled with the enduring impact of my ideas on the human understanding of nature, a quiet power that would continue to grow and evolve as new evidence was discovered in the years that followed. The family preserved my letters and notebooks, ensuring that my thoughts would remain accessible to future generations, a gift of knowledge that would last long after I was gone. The house at Down House remained a place of pilgrimage for those interested in the history of science, a place where the spirit of inquiry could still be felt in the air. My life served as an example of how perseverance and curiosity could overcome even the most difficult personal challenges, a story of quiet endurance and unwavering commitment to the truth. The world had changed because of my insights into the mechanisms of life and the diversity of species, a change that would ripple outwards through the centuries. My name became synonymous with the study of evolution and the natural processes that govern all living things, a name that would be spoken with respect and wonder for generations to come. The silence that followed my death was filled with the enduring impact of my ideas on the human understanding of nature, a silence that was not empty but full of the weight of history and the quiet presence of knowledge. The naturalist who once sailed the world had found his final resting place in the quiet garden of Down House, a place where the earthworms still turned the soil and the climbing plants still reached for the light. The story of my final years is one of quiet endurance and unwavering commitment to the truth, a story that would continue to inspire scientists and thinkers for centuries to come. The light of the afternoon sun would continue to filter through the heavy velvet curtains, casting a warm, soft glow on the worn rug and the oak table, a reminder of the quiet power of observation and the enduring legacy of a life dedicated to the study of nature. The heavy curtains of my study in Down House filtered the light into a soft, golden haze that seemed to hold the dust of decades in suspension. I sat at the desk where the wood had grown smooth beneath my palms, worn by years of writing and the slow, deliberate movement of a quill. Outside, the garden lay still under the weight of the summer heat, broken only by the distant hum of bees that had become the rhythm of my days. My health had become a persistent companion, a relapsing illness that claimed 1 out of every 3 days by the year 1849, forcing me to rest when the strength simply would not return. Yet the mind remained sharp even when the body faltered, turning inward to the vast questions that had begun with a voyage across the oceans. I watched the shadows stretch slowly across the Persian rug as the afternoon wore on, marking time in a gentle, unhurried way that felt timeless. The air inside was thick and warm, filled with the quiet peace of a house that had seen generations of thought and debate. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked with a steady, rhythmic sound that measured the passage of time without urgency or fear. The fire in the hearth had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting a warm, soft orange light across the floorboards that creaked softly under my slow movements. I no longer sought to read the soul from the shape of a face, for the old ways of physiognomy had given ground to the quiet observation of behavior and the slow accumulation of evidence. The political climate of the age supported exploration, yet often resisted the radical new ideas that challenged established doctrines, creating an atmosphere of cautious optimism mixed with deep uncertainty. Reform acts had expanded the franchise, but the intellectual elite remained, a small and exclusive group, guarding their knowledge like precious stones in a dark vault. The room smelled faintly of old paper, beeswax, and the dried lavender placed in the corners to keep away moths, a scent that clung to the very fabric of my existence. I paused often to listen to the birds singing in the trees beyond the glass, their songs a reminder of the diversity of life that unfolded without human direction. A small table nearby held a collection of lenses and instruments used for my microscopic observations, tools that had revealed the hidden mechanics of the natural world. The silence of the room was broken only by the soft scratching of my pen on the page, a sound that echoed the quiet determination of a life spent in pursuit of truth. My family preserved the letters and notebooks, ensuring that the thoughts formed in this sanctuary would remain accessible to future generations who might walk these same halls. The house at Down House became a place of pilgrimage for those interested in the history of science, a testament to the quiet endurance required to see a great idea through to its conclusion. The light shifted slowly across the room as the day wore on toward evening, and I felt a profound sense of acceptance regarding the work that remained to be done. The heavy oak desk was cluttered with dried plant specimens and stacks of leather-bound journals, each page holding a fragment of the great puzzle of life. A brass microscope sat untouched on the corner, its lenses catching the warm, amber glow of the fading daylight, a silent witness to the hours of careful scrutiny. The walls were lined with shelves holding rows of identical glass jars containing preserved insects and small shells, each one a story of adaptation and survival, written in the language of form and function. I remembered the voyage that had played a pivotal role in forming the theories on evolution, the memory of the sea, and the strange lands that had sparked the initial curiosity. The text I had written aimed to prove natural selection as the cause of adaptive change, a concept that would fundamentally alter the understanding of life on Earth for all subsequent generations. The scientific community accepted these ideas with a mixture of awe and rigorous critical analysis, a process that unfolded over many decades like the slow growth of a forest. My legacy rested not only on biological facts but also on the philosophical shifts I had initiated in human thought, changing the way we saw our place in the natural order. The naturalist who once sailed the world now found himself confined to this quiet room, yet the scope of the mind knew no such boundaries. The historical context of my life was defined by the tension between tradition and the emerging spirit of scientific inquiry, a struggle that had shaped every word I wrote. The British Empire reached its zenith, yet internal debates about the nature of humanity intensified within the scholarly community, echoing the conflicts that had raged in the hearts of men for centuries. Political stability allowed for the funding of expeditions that would reveal the diversity of life on Earth, a gift of the times that I had been fortunate to receive. The era about the origins and future of biological life had begun with a single question, and it would continue to grow and evolve as new evidence was discovered in the years that followed. The scientific method itself was strengthened by the rigorous standards I applied to my own research, a discipline that demanded patience and an unwavering commitment to the truth. My work stood as a monument to the human capacity for understanding the natural world through reason, a beacon that would guide new generations of scientists and thinkers. The enduring relevance of the theories ensured that the name would remain synonymous with evolutionary biology, a legacy that would outlast the physical limitations of the body. The quiet legacy of this life continued to inspire new generations of scientists and thinkers alike, a ripple effect that would spread far beyond the walls of this study. A single oil painting from the late Victorian era depicts a quiet study filled with the soft light of a setting sun, capturing the essence of these final years. The room contains a heavy oak desk cluttered with dried plant specimens and stacks of leather-bound journals, a scene of peaceful productivity and quiet reflection. The colors are muted and earthy, blending browns, greens, and soft grays into a harmonious whole that reflects the calm acceptance of the end. The texture of the worn rug underfoot suggests years of quiet pacing and contemplation by the man who once worked there, a man who had learned to listen to the whispers of nature. The atmosphere remains peaceful and meditative, inviting the viewer to pause and reflect on the quiet power of observation and the slow accumulation of knowledge. The light slowly fades as the day ends, leaving the room in a gentle, twilight slumber, a fitting conclusion to a life spent in the pursuit of understanding. The silence that followed the end was filled with the enduring impact of the ideas on the human understanding of nature, a silence that was not empty but full of the accumulated weight of history. The death in 1882 marked the end of a life dedicated to the quiet observation of nature, a journey that began in the gardens of Shrewsbury and ended in the quiet study of Down House. The burial within the hallowed grounds of Westminster Abbey signaled the immense respect held by contemporaries and the nation, a recognition of the profound shifts in thought that had occurred. The story of the final years is one of quiet endurance and unwavering commitment to the truth, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most difficult personal challenges. The world had changed because of the insights into the mechanisms of life and the diversity of species, a change that would resonate through the centuries. The natural processes that govern all living things were no longer a mystery to be feared, but a pattern to be understood with wonder and gratitude. The silence that followed was filled with the enduring impact of the ideas on the human understanding of nature, a silence that echoed the peace of the garden and the steady tick of the clock. The heavy oak door of the house at Down House closed for the last time in that quiet year of 1882, sealing away the scent of dried ferns and the soft scratch of my own pen against paper. My life had ended, yet the work remained, resting in the warm dust of the library where sunlight still pooled on the floorboards in the afternoons. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with the rustle of pages turning in distant halls, the quiet murmur of students debating my words, and the slow, steady pulse of a world that had begun to see itself differently. I was laid to rest in the great stone nave of Westminster Abbey, a place where kings and poets had slept for centuries. The weight of that marble slab felt appropriate, a final anchor for a man who had spent his life weighing the small variations of nature. It was a strange honor to lie among such giants, yet my mind had always been with the giants of the earth, the beetles and the barnacles, the orchids and the worms. The respect shown by my contemporaries was a soft blanket that covered the sharp edges of the controversy my ideas had caused. They saw the man who had sailed the world, who had watched the mountains rise and the glaciers carve the valleys. They understood that the quiet observation of a single leaf could shift the foundation of human thought. The house itself became a sanctuary for those seeking to understand the mechanics of life. Visitors walked the paths I had worn smooth with my own boots, their footsteps echoing softly in the garden where I had once tested the sensitivity of plants. The children of my own family had grown into adults who carried my notebooks with care, preserving the letters and the sketches that documented my long years of doubt and discovery. They ensured that the evidence remained accessible, that the chain of reasoning would not break in the hands of future generations. The garden had been a living laboratory, a place where I had enlisted the help of my offspring to gather data that my own failing health could no longer collect. They watched the earthworms with wide eyes, counted the petals of flowers, and recorded the behavior of birds with a patience that mirrored my own. That bond between father and children had deepened the science, turning the abstract into the tangible. The support of friends and colleagues from across the ocean and the continent had sustained me through the long winters of illness. We exchanged specimens and ideas in thick envelopes that traveled by steamship and rail, each letter a brick in the foundation of a new understanding of life. A specific fact remains clear in the memory of that. The modern synthesis of the 1940s would later unite the principles of natural selection with the newly discovered laws of genetics, casting mutation and recombination as the source of variability that drives the great engine of change. This was a development I could not have foreseen, yet it felt like the natural completion of a puzzle I had spent a lifetime assembling. The initial resistance to my ideas had been fierce, a storm of theological and social upheaval that battered the shores of the scientific community. Yet over the decades the storm subsided and the waters calmed into a broad acceptance of the explanatory power of the theory. The world had changed because of the insight that life was not fixed, but fluid, a river constantly reshaping its own course. My name became synonymous with the study of evolution, a word that now appears in textbooks in museums and in the quiet conversations of scientists in laboratories around the globe. The philosophy of the age shifted, moving away from the idea of a static creation toward a dynamic universe governed by natural laws. The legacy rests not only on the biological facts, but on the way humanity now perceives its own place in the natural order. We are no longer separate from the rest of creation, standing above it in a special hierarchy, but are woven into the same great tapestry as the birds and the insects. The initial shock of this realization has faded into a quiet understanding, a background hum of knowledge that informs modern thought. Researchers in genetics and paleontology still return to the original text, looking for the foundational insights into the diversity of species that were first articulated in those long years of study. The slow accumulation of knowledge through the collaborative spirit of the era built a robust framework that has withstood the test of time. Every new fossil discovered, every sequence of DNA analyzed, adds another piece to the grand puzzle. The man who questioned the fixity of species opened a door that can never be closed, allowing a dynamic understanding of life to flow into the future. The house at Down House remains a place of pilgrimage, where the air still smells of the same earth and the same rain that fell on my garden. Visitors walk through the rooms with a reverence that feels both strange and comforting. They touch the wood of the desk where I wrote, feeling the grain of the history beneath their fingertips. The silence of the house is not the silence of death, but the silence of a work that is still being done. It is the quiet of a library, where the books are still being read, the ideas still being tested, the questions still being asked. The world continues to grapple with the implications of a universe that evolves, that adapts, that survives through the quiet struggle of the fittest. My life served as an example of how perseverance and curiosity could overcome the most difficult personal challenges, the chronic illness that kept me indoors for so many years. The story of those final years is one of quiet endurance, of a mind that refused to stop working even when the body had failed. The impact of the work extended far beyond the boundaries of biology, touching fields such as psychology and anthropology, changing how we understand the human mind and its origins. The scientific method itself was strengthened by the rigorous standards applied to the research, by the refusal to accept a hypothesis without the weight of evidence. The enduring relevance of the theories ensures that the voice of the quiet naturalist continues to speak to the present day. The man from Kent altered the course of intellectual history with a patient and methodical approach that remains a model for all who seek to understand the world. The world had changed because of the insights into the mechanisms of life, and the change continues to ripple outward. The silence that followed the death was filled with the enduring impact of the ideas on the human understanding of nature. The legacy is a living thing, growing and evolving as new evidence is discovered in the years that follow. It is a testament to the power of sustained observation and logical deduction, a monument to